Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Khipu 2021 event series in artificial intelligence. My name is Pavel Sprechman, and I am one of the organizers of Khipu. It's a real pleasure to have you all here. All right, so for those of you who are joining us today for the first time, let me tell you what the series is all about. So the Khipu 2021 event series in artificial intelligence are a series of monthly online events that are geared to supporting and strengthening the advancement of the AI community in Latin America. So we do monthly events, each of which has two parts. The first part is what we call conversations in AI, which are wide-ranging conversations exploring the most critical unsolved problems in AI today. The second part is called applications of AI, which are deep dives into examples of AI applications in the real world, where we discuss the opportunities and challenges. This is our third event, and we are planning to have many more throughout the year. So please follow us on Twitter, Slack, and the different channels to learn more about the upcoming events. I want to take this opportunity to thank our generous sponsors that make this event series possible. All right, let's go now to today's event. In my personal view, today's event is on one of the most critical topics that us as the AI community are facing today, and well beyond as well, which is fairness and biases in AI. The first part of today's event is going to be a conversation with these outstanding researchers, Emily Denton, Luciana Benotti, Laura Alonso, and Shakir Mohamed. The second part, we're going to then have a little short break, and we're going to have a second part in which Laura and Luciana will do a deep dive into a specific example in the context of natural language processing. So I'm going to start by introducing Shakir, and he will take it from there. All right, so Shakir is a research scientist and lead at DeepMind. He works in generative models, applied machine learning, and socio-technical AI. Shakir's research is centered on real-world applications of machine learning and AI that address global challenges and social transformation. Shakir leads a non-profit organization called the Deep Learning Indaba, whose mission is to strengthen African machine learning and artificial intelligence. The Deep Learning Indaba was a huge inspiration for us here at Khipu. Shakir's support and constant encouragement was really invaluable to us. And we're not exaggerating when we say that Khipu would not be what it is today without Shakir's support. But this goes way beyond Khipu. Shakir is an active supporter of many other grassroots organizations all around the world. Without further ado, please welcome Shakir Mohamed.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. And hello, Khipu community. It is the 16th of June, 2021. And today we are about to experience an incredible discussion with three of our community's shining stars. Our topic for today is bias and fairness in AI. And it's meant to deepen the discussions we've already had at previous Khipu online events. One I'll point you to in particular is the talk by Sandra Avila on melanoma and detection bias that happened a few weeks ago. We'll share the links with you so you can get another insight into this important question of fairness and bias. We have around 45 minutes together, and so I encourage you to ask as many questions as you can think of throughout our time together. You'll find the Q&A tool at the bottom. It's called Ask a Question. And we also have explicit time at the end where we'll take as many of your questions as we can get through. You can also use the chat to engage with each other on the side. Use the chat in Spanish, in Portuguese, in English, in any language that you want to use, but at all times be respectful and kind with your words. So let me introduce to you today our stellar panel. And I'm going to go through them in order, and you'll see them appear on the screen. So first is Emily Denton. Emily, if you're there, if you could just say hello, scream, make some noise, and tell us what's outside your window today.
Hi, everyone. Outside my window is actually a backyard with a giant aerial circus rig, because in my spare time, I fly around in the sky, and I got this during the pandemic. So that's outside me.
Now, if you thought that was not impressive enough, Emily Denton is a research scientist at Google's ethical AI team, where they examine the societal impacts of AI technology. Their recent research centers on critically examining the norms, values, and work practices that structure the development and use of machine learning datasets. Prior to joining Google, Emily received their PhD at New York University, where they focused on unsupervised learning and generative modeling of images and video. Welcome, Emily, and thank you again for being with us today. So next, let's introduce you to Laura Alonso Alemany. Hi, Laura, if you could say hello, make some noise also, tell us what's happening. How has your day started so far?
Hi. So my day started with the first snowfalls in 12 years here in Córdoba, in the city of Córdoba. So quite strange, but nice. It's good to see some change after such a long time indoors and seeing masked faces.
The beauty of the snow, especially in this winter time in July, coldest or June, still not, it could get colder still. So, and again, Laura is a linguist working in natural language processing applications and teaching computer science at the Universidad Nacional de Córdoba in Argentina. She is interested in how empirical methods can help understand natural language phenomena, especially for minority languages. She enjoys area analysis and automatic procedures and trying to understand the impacts of different areas in a much broader sense. So again, thank you, Laura, for being here today. And then we have Luciana Benotti. Luciana, again, say hello, make some noise. Tell us how you have been enjoying the snowfall today.
Hi. So snow, it falls a lot here in my town. I live in a town in the province of Córdoba, so about 1 hour from where Laura lives. And my daughter is really excited about the snow today. The only bad thing is that I don't have Wi-Fi, so I'm with my mobile data right now, but I hope it works well.
Fingers crossed that your connection is amazing, and hopefully there's lots of snow people and sledding to do as long as the snow lasts. So Luciana investigates dialogue systems and their social impact, including misunderstandings, grounding, and educative applications. She is a researcher at the Universidad Nacional de Córdoba and at CONICET in Argentina. She is also an elected member of the NACL Executive Board, which just finished last week, representing fellow Latin Americans working on natural language processing. And of course, I have the honor of being your guide today. My name is Shakir Mohamed. I'm a research scientist at DeepMind and also a trustee of your cousin community from the Deep Learning Indaba. So we're going to have two parts. The first is on the basics of bias to help us all understand the topic a little bit more, and then a second theme on new directions in fairness. So again, ask your questions at any time you like using the Ask a Question tool you'll find at the bottom of your screen. So let's kick off. Just to get to know each of you a little bit better, I wonder if you could each share with us a small lesson, something you have learned in this last year or 6 months and in the global pandemic, a lesson about yourself, your community, your work, family members, the world around you, anything. And maybe we can start off with you, Luciana.
Well, one thing I learned is to challenge myself. So this year I learned that I'm stronger than I thought. And related to this, about the world, I learned that when people say this is impossible, it's not really impossible. They mean something different. This applied to many things, but I've seen it both regionally with the virtual bureaucracy, in my workplace and in my country in general, and at the world level, in particular related to virtual international conferences. That's something I've been hitting wall after wall as an activist for these to have virtual conferences and to have virtual bureaucracy. And people kept telling me that these were impossible. But now they are here. They are reality.
Great. Thank you so much. That lesson of breaking boundaries is so important, and that, there's always a possibility, always the opportunity to do so much more. We thank you for sharing that with us. Emily, is there a lesson you would share with us?
Yeah, so this pandemic made me think a lot about local community, and I started thinking about this on multiple levels. In the States, or more specifically New York, where I'm based, mutual aid efforts were some of the most effective mechanisms of directly supporting folks who are most severely impacted by COVID. And so this kind of reiterated for me the importance of thinking small, which is often kind of antithetical to a lot of the kind of Silicon Valley culture, which valorizes scale above all else. And so I really thought a lot about that and kind of recognizing individuals sort of situated within communities as offering the most effective support in many cases and having a certain kind of expertise. And then I also sort of brought that thinking and just general reflection about community into my own academic work. And I've been thinking a lot this past year and a half about just the importance of kind of centering relationships with colleagues, investing in kind of building and fostering those relationships, and trying to bring practices of care into those collaborations. And realizing that just the way in which myself and my colleagues and collaborators, the way in which we organize ourselves and kind of relate to one another, and the values that drive that, that's intricately related to the kind of scholarship that we produce. Those aren't two separate things. So those were a lot of the things that I've been mulling over the past year that I hope gives you all some food for thought.
Very deep, difficult questions about Khipu community. You, of course, are one of those powerful organizations of coming together. That thing that's small that becomes big, and we see with everyone here today. Thank you so much, Emily. Luciana, is there anything particular you have learned or struck you over this last few months?
I guess you mean me?
Yes, sorry, Laura.
Yeah.
Okay. Don't worry. We have a Friday group where everyone is called Lu or Lau, so we are used to that. So yeah, I have learned that there are many things that we need more than we thought, and things that we knew we didn't need, and we don't. Like it's great not having to go to the office every day, because there are many people who live far in Argentina, and who have been able to pursue their studies this year. I have been able to collaborate with many more people because now being in different cities is not a problem. But then after more than 1 year of this, we're all exhausted. Something is lacking. I mean, we are all exhausted. Like we nothing is interesting anymore. And we just don't want any more meetings, or they invite us and we have to make an effort to say yes. And so what I have is more like a question than an answer. It's not a lesson. It's more, I want us to make some sort of agreement as to what we actually need, and what we are going to be doing when this is over. So I really want people to be able to pursue their studies, even if they are far. But I don't want us to be so apathetic all the time. So we'll see. I'm confident that we will manage. I feel that we are growing empathetic with each other also, so we can come to an agreement.
That's a brilliant question, and anyone who is listening, please in the chat maybe respond. How do you think about that question? What is it that we actually need to both use the power of these virtual online communities and connect us in so many ways, reduce the barriers that Luciana was making, but then rightly, as Laura is asking us, what else do we need? What more is there? And share with us your reflections in the chat as we carry on our conversation. And maybe Laura will come back to it at the end to see what people think. So let's dig in our first section. It's all about basics of bias. And so here we want to just set the scene a little bit to help us all understand a little bit more about what is this topic of fairness and bias. So Emily, I wanted to come to you, and if you could give us a short, simple introduction or a basis with which to think about bias and fairness. What does bias and fairness mean in machine learning?
Okay, I'm going to try. So I want to start by recognizing that, the term bias is heavily overloaded. It carries both a kind of social and technical meaning. And we often see it used in ways that kind of span both of these meanings. So I'm going to sort of start simple, and for the sake of this conversation, really sort of think about algorithmic bias as a skew of sorts, often understood relative to some implicit or explicit baseline. So for example, we might have a data set of images that's being used to develop a computer vision system, for example. And if the images in the data set have been predominantly sourced from a certain geographical region, we might say that data set is geographically biased towards that region. Or we might have a machine learning model that has error statistics that are skewed, such that data associated with a particular sociodemographic group is subject to higher error rates. And we might describe that as a form of bias. So another kind of important thing here is that not all bias is problematic. And it's sort of nonsensical to think about something being completely unbiased, because that suggests that there is some universal truth that we are seeking to obtain. But we can really, in this conversation, be thinking about what are the effects of different kinds of bias. And in particular, when might bias be undesirable or problematic in nature? So for example, to come back to the image data set case, imagine we have images sourced from North America. This might be okay if the intent is to design technology for that specific population. But if the intent is to build a model that's going to serve a much larger population, then that particular bias in the data set suddenly becomes very problematic and very harmful. So this is also where the notion of fairness comes up, specifically thinking about biases that reproduce or compound existing social biases, often against historically disadvantaged populations. And again, I want to recognize that there's a huge complexity here. Fairness is another concept that's heavily overloaded. It's been described as an essentially contested concept, a concept that's deployed in different ways in different contexts and can actually mean very different things to different disciplinary communities. I want to point folks to a paper by Mulligan et al. Titled "This Thing Called Fairness, Disciplinary Confusion, Realizing a Value in Technology." I'll drop the link in the chat. But I would just point this to folks to read to kind of understand some of the complexities just around this concept. But again, to sort of simplify for this conversation, algorithmic fairness researchers have tended to operationalize the concept of fairness in a way that hinges on sort of equal treatment across different groups or across different individuals that are differentiated on the basis of some kind of sensitive characteristics such as gender, race, age, and so on. So for example, a classifier that exhibits vastly differential error rates for different age groups or different gender groups might be understood as being unfair within this context. And these kinds of definitions have sort of histories that relate to a lot of US civil rights era anti-discrimination legislation, kind of trying to formalize notions of disparate treatment and disparate impact in really kind of concrete mathematical forms. And then the final thing that I want to note here, just really briefly, and I think we can kind of come back to this in conversation, is that there are a lot of ongoing discussions trying to push conversations in the algorithmic fairness community beyond a kind of hyper focus on concepts such as fairness, and also thinking about kind of justice, equity, and other related concepts that have really, really sort of deep social implications. So I'll pause there with, again, the recognition that this answer could go on for hours.
Thank you. That was beautiful, and I think so clear and distinct. And we thank Gabriel Modecki, who has shared the link to us to that paper, this thing called Fairness, Disciplinary Confusion, Realizing a Value in Technology. You find it in the archive. It's in the chat. Maybe we could just dig a little bit more on this as we progress. Luciana, is bias restricted only to bias in data sets? What, in your view, are the different aspects of bias, if you can pick up and add to what Emily was just saying?
Well, I mean, I think as an area, we know that data sets are not the only source of bias, and that there are different other kinds. I want to mention 4 sources of bias. On the one hand, data sets, then algorithms, but also metrics and people. With respect to data sets, I will not talk much about that because we will have also the practical session afterwards, and we will see concrete examples there. I will just briefly mention that also on Slack, we shared an article before the pre-discussion for this session, and something that that article was making a point is that in order for data sets not to be so biased, people annotating them need to understand better the social context of the collection of those data sets. And also, I wanted to mention Mauricio Repeto that contributed to that discussion previous that we had on Slack. So I wanted to thank him there. And I will move to algorithms. So we also know that algorithms can be biased. I mean, even if an algorithm is not based on machine learning and it just makes the decision to make some alphabetical order, that decision to make an alphabetical order can be biased if we are ordering, for instance, surnames that are that in most probably start with the letters, say, in the beginning and in the end of the alphabet. For instance, this happens with Nahuatl surnames in Mexico, that most surnames start with an X. And then if we order alphabetically, always we will keep these people last for whatever that algorithm is trying to do, for instance, vaccine distribution. And then the third aspect is metrics. So as a researcher in dialogue systems, I find it really like unsatisfying that currently metrics being used for these systems are mostly automatic. And when we do have human evaluation of these systems, I mean, the automatic metrics are great and they are cheap, and they let us evaluate our systems as when we are developing them, right? But we know that for dialogue systems, automatic metrics do not correlate well with the functioning of the systems. And then when we do have a human evaluation of systems, sometimes judges, like humans that receive this data, just evaluate a couple of turns of a dialogue. And they have no context. So coming back to the first point that I made on data sets, we need to have more context to see whether our technology is working properly or not. And the final point also, as Emily was saying, in the sake of time, is I want to mention that I think, in fact, of all these, for me at least, is the most important one. It's people. So what data sets, which algorithms, and which metrics to maximize are decisions taken by people. So which metrics we use, which data sets, which algorithms, these are decisions that people make. And sometimes we forget that. As users, we forget that. And people that are not familiar with this technology don't think about the people behind these things. And these people behind this technology are a homogeneous group of people. And the more homogeneous, in my opinion, the more biased. for me, what we have to do when we have a project that can potentially harm a group of people is to involve that group of people in the development of a technology. For instance, if it's a technology about identifying the gender of a person by perceptual factors, then it should involve people that have been misgendered. If it's the technology for people for deciding how many more years someone has to stay in prison, maybe we need to start thinking seriously about involving people in prison in the development cycle of this technology. So yeah, these are the 4 things that I think are more important, but we need to think more about people when we think about bias.
Yeah, I love that question of data, algorithms, metrics, people, and they're all so interrelated. And actually, there's so many other questions that you related. There's clearly a conversation about diversity to be had, and maybe we can have that as well later on. And then this question about what participation means, and if you can even ever do a meaningful participation, the example you're giving of prisoners. But maybe we can make this more specific. We can talk specifically about Latin American communities and fairness and bias facing Latin American communities. So Laura, maybe you can kick us off. Could you give us some examples or thoughts specifically about the question of bias and fairness for Latin American communities?
Yeah, I think maybe it's better if Luciana talks first, because she has been Latin American for a longer time, because she was born here and I wasn't.
Luciana, all yours. The floor has been given to you.
I like that. I have been Latin American for a longer time, but you are Latin American now. Yeah, so as for the rest of the world, artificial intelligence entered all aspects of Latin American life: justice, education, entertainment, publicity, purchasing, you name it. I think one of the things that happens here, and I was really surprised to see that when I found out that there were more mobile lines in Argentina than people in the country, is that all people, even, I mean, in very poor people, have an internet connection, and they are all, I mean, they are almost all the time connected. So we are consuming a lot of artificial intelligence. Why? Because it's cheaper than human labor also. Something that I think about the future is that if you have money, you will receive the attention of a person. And if you don't have money, you will receive the attention of an artificial intelligence. So, so I think that so this is happening in many parts of the world. One crucial difference for us is that we Latin Americans are not represented in the development of these technologies. So for example, in the North American ACL conference that you were speaker, Shakir, last week, and that I participated last week, that conference is supposed to represent the whole American continent, but only 71 people from Latin America, in contrast to more than 1,600 people from the US and Canada. And 60% of the population in the Americas live in Latin America. So these technologies are changing Latin Americans according to how the people in these other countries not living in Latin America think that we have to change. So I think it's time that we get more involved in the things in all levels, in research, in ideas, in development, in claiming our data. I mean, because people say, so in the Slack channel, Joao Araujo said that we don't have data sets, but data is being collected all the time from Latin America. So that data is somewhere, but we don't have access to it.
Laura.
Yeah, and I want to add to that, because I'm a linguist and my mother tongue is a minority language. So minority languages suffer a lot here. So there are many speakers, millions of speakers of minority languages whose mother tongue is a minority language, and they don't receive any kind of development. So anything related to progress is in a foreign language. even a language that they don't hear in their context. So it's this, even if it's Spanish, which is not their mother tongue, it's a different Spanish from the Spanish that they speak usually when they speak their second language. So I know this is old history, but it is still a real problem here. And now that we are more aware of the harms of invisibilization, of stereotypes, we are acquiring what sociologists and anthropologists have been saying for a very long time, that if you tell people that their language is not apt for technology or for higher education or to write papers on, then their culture is not so good and they themselves are not so good. And this happens. So we have real problems here with talent. We have people who, of course, are just as talented as anyone else, but they do not pursue higher education. They do not do things that they themselves would find valuable because they don't think they are capable of doing that. And it is very, very evident when you say, oh, this person speaks Quechua, and then everything is, so all the apps in the store are either Spanish or English. So of course he will think that Quechua is some townish, brutish thing. But it happens also with Spanish. So even Spanish speakers think that they speak patois. So, and you can ask the French government how it is done to make people think that they are less because they don't speak the correct version of their language. And this is happening all the time because we don't have the data sets. Of course, the data is collected, so you have lots of audio recordings of people speaking, for example, the dialect, the variant that we speak in Cordoba is very particular, and everyone is, they were saying something about that in the chat a little while ago. So, but when you hear about Argentinian, it's only Buenos Aires Argentinian. And the Uruguayan are packed together with them, and the Cordobian, which has many, many different features, is not acknowledged at all. But there are 3 million people at least speaking Cordobian. Mm-hmm. And they don't get recognized by speech synthesizers because they don't speak correctly. And this contributes to people having a lesser image of themselves and accepting a lot of things like judicial mistreatments, administrative mistreatments, because they grow up knowing that they are less. Yeah. So that is something that we really have been pushing from humanities for a long time, but needs to be pushed more because we are not getting enough attention for that.
Yeah, I think this point is so profound. In my own research, I have tried to characterize this as a form of technological colonialism. And when this technology comes, one of the core elements of studying colonialism, particularly in the humanities, is exactly this idea that you mentioned, where communities, people lose their sense of self. And that psychological damage, that loss of self is so profound. But actually, one of the great and important lessons of colonial history is that communities always have the power to recover themselves. And I think what you are saying is that the data set is the lack of data is not the problem, but creating a data set is part of a solution of the recovery of ourselves, the recovery of our own pride, the recovery of our ownership that you're both making. I want to linger on this question a little bit longer.
I want to add something. So we are trying with sometimes with not so hard, but to use Spanish more often. So we are using it in the chat. We are using it in the Slack. We are using it in the notebook that we will be sharing. Because Spanish is also lingua franca here, so why should it be second to English? And I mean, we can all speak a language that we all understand here. So here it's English, but for example, it has happened a lot that when we're speaking with Portuguese people, we all speak English, but we can understand, so Brazilian people, but we can understand each other by speaking our mother languages. So we are trying to make more of a stance of speaking our mother tongues when it is a possibility.
Emily, I wanted to linger and just invite you to, as a scholar of criticism and being critical in the way we think about our work, how do you see this question, particularly of bias for Latin American communities, in the broader conversation we've just been having about loss of self, the role of language, lack of representation, these kind? How does your scholarship inform this conversation?
Yeah, so I mean, this is pretty intricately related to a lot of my work, because a lot of what I'm doing is trying to understand in various ways what are the kind of limitations in our current kind of conceptual framing of bias and fairness. And in particular, I try and take a very sort of socio-technical approach to my examination of algorithmic systems, really kind of recognizing that these systems are a combination of technical and social components. And there's been a lot of work within the algorithmic fairness community that's been trying to push the field away from kind of pure like technical abstractions of algorithmic fairness. And this is kind of what I pointed to a little bit in that sort of opening introduction that I gave, where I was like, okay, we have these very technical definitions of what it means for a system to be unfair in this way or that way. But then how do you connect that to the kind of lived realities of communities that are experiencing harm from these AI systems? And the way in which I want to bring that into this conversation is really thinking about how sort of algorithmic frames and these technical fairness definitions, they often sort of abstract away different social groups into like mathematically comparable forms. And this kind of analysis can be really useful, but it doesn't, sort of connect the dots in the way that I think we need to, right? We need to be thinking about systems of inequality in the world, thinking about the intersection of many different forces of oppression, including, racism, classism, sexism, colonialism, and so on, and how these forces impact, both individuals that are interfacing with these technologies, but also the design and development of these technologies. And so I think like once you sort of recognize that critical component, then I think we get to this conversation of like bringing in diverse forms of expertise within the kind of algorithmic fairness conversations. And then this sort of is both like substantive like work expertise from a variety of disciplines, but also very critically lived experience, right? And so this is kind of returning to Luciana's comment earlier on about centering people, and this whole conversation here is that it's, folks within a particular community who are directly impacted by and interfacing with these technologies that have the expertise that is relevant, right? And so even if we're thinking about understanding and examining bias in a system, if it's folks situated in one country that are then trying to understand what's happening somewhere else or what the experiences of another community will be, they're just missing a form of expertise that is essential. And this is both in the development of the technologies and in the analysis of these technologies. And so again, I think that's like really always needs to be at the forefront of this conversation.
Everyone is agreeing. This panel is on fire today. Thank you all. I wanted to keep us going on this and take a question that has been asked. And let's just think about that a little bit. This one comes from Mary Fortunato. What are some affirmative actions that you support for increasing representation in AI that are relatively easy to implement? For example, related to Luciana's comment on conference participation, attendees and speakers, should conferences offer a minimum number of free spots to certain regions on the globe? So I guess Mary is inviting us to just think a bit more about solutions to some of the problems that we were thinking about. And what are on our minds, she uses this language of affirmative actions and somewhat more simpler one. Luciana, your name was mentioned, so maybe we can kick off with you, and then we'll move on to some of the others.
Yes. Well, regarding participation, I think that so what I'm doing inside the exec board for the North American ACL, for the rest of the people, so it's the ACL is the Association of Computational Linguistics that works for promoting the research of natural language processing. And inside there, I'm trying to get like tiered or free registration for regions that are underrepresented. Also, there are efforts like the widening NLP that are getting funding for students from Latin America and from other parts that are underrepresented in the world, like Africa, to participate in these conferences. But something that maybe has not been mentioned, and I wanted to add to this, is that something I'm worried is that artificial intelligence, the developed tools, are putting more power into less hands and are putting also more resources and more money. And many of the things like accessing these conferences and being able to participate in the process of developing these technologies, to have access to money, to either to train yourself, to study, to understand these areas. And the fact that now the artificial intelligence is used to put more money in less hands is particularly harmful for Latin American communities and for their involvement. And this is deepening the economic barriers in the community. So I think if we are committed to fairness, we should work to have a more fair distribution of economic resources. So we already in Latin America have a large percentage of population living in poverty. And if people live in poverty and they don't have what to eat, they can hardly get involved into developing artificial intelligence. So I think a shift there is needed. And we can do some things from the places where we are, but we need more people getting involved. So I'm grateful to everybody that is here today listening to this and to the question that Mary did to start this discussion.
Yes, thank you. And I think this question of the role of economic inequality and redistribution, the future of jobs, so important and tied fundamentally into the way we are thinking. I wanted us to move forward. There is another question, so maybe let's take this other question. Is it good or not if our data set is biased because it is reflecting a bias in real life? And I think, Emily, let's come to you about this. And for example, there are problems where existing biases in society, and when we collect data, we would see these biases. How should we handle that question? Maybe for some specific problems, if we are trying to reduce these biases in data, we can be altering the reality. And so actually, maybe let me take that question from Yesam Meza. Thank you so much for that question, to say, in what ways can we use machine learning to expose bias? When is bias problematic? When is it not? And this question of altering reality, I think, is really profound. So Emily, please.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay, so I have a lot of thoughts here. I'll try and be concise. So first off, I think that bias can be most problematic when it goes unaccounted for, right? So when it is, and I think this is something that often happens in the development of algorithmic systems, which very frequently get kind of put forward and discussed within this like rhetoric of objectivity, right? It's data, it's math, it's science, and so on. Ruha Benjamin talks about this in Race After Technology. Everybody should read this book. It's a great book, just talking about how inequality gets perpetuated through this kind of race-neutral rhetoric often. So that being said, if you have a data set and you have a model trained on that data set and you're really accounting for what is in that data set, then this can be a really powerful way of exposing and understanding patterns of social inequality, right? You might take, let's think, for example, we have a data set of, I'm I'm going to take a US example because I have a good little thing that I'll point to in a second. But let's imagine we have a data set that includes patterns of police arrests in some location, right? This is something that people have taken and developed predictive models of policing for. And this is fairly horrifying for a variety of reasons, in part because patterns of arrest do not reflect crime patterns. They reflect a whole bunch of corrupt and racist policing patterns. And many folks have gone and studied this. And so when you treat this data set as some kind of natural reflection of crime and then use it to make decisions in the future about policing, then we end up with this kind of, feedback cycle of just reproducing these kinds of inequalities. But you could also imagine taking this data set and using it as a sort of descriptive understanding of the world, and then use machine learning techniques to understand, okay, what kinds of disparate policing patterns are we seeing in this place or that place, right? And so all of a sudden, the same data provides a useful lens into some underlying social phenomenon. And I think this just requires a shift in kind of reference and understanding the data set. On the one hand, you're understanding it as some kind of neutral reflection of the world. And on the other hand, you're understanding it as capturing some kind of social phenomenon that you want to use machine learning tools to study. Obviously, this is kind of oversimplifying things, but I think that, kind of shift in frame of reference can be really useful. And folks have also sort of leveraged machine learning techniques to study patterns in data and kind of expose data set bias in various ways. So there's this paper that I remember reading a while ago, data set cartography. So this is an example of a team kind of developing a way of kind of understanding data set dynamics and biases within data sets by training machine learning models on those data sets and kind of probing for model behaviors. I think there's a lot of really interesting things we can do there as well. So yeah, and then I guess I'd say one other thing that I want to point to just in terms of the questions specifically about using ML tools to study data sets. Google recently released this tool. It's in a beta form right now. I'm going to drop a link to it, but it's called Know Your Data, and it's basically a sort of data set exploration tool that has a bunch of ML powered models built into it, and it allows people to kind of surface different biases in their data set in a really easy to use way. So this is just a really tangible tool for folks who are working with data and want to kind of understand their data better. So yeah, I'll stop there. Those are some of my thoughts.
Great. We have one more question, which maybe I will put to you, Laura, from Sasha Luciani. How can we cultivate more common research and projects across countries and cultures in AI? The current state of things seems to be more siloed and less distributed. So she has a kind of a bleak view there, maybe a bit of reality. How do you think about creating these kind of more richer research communities?
My experience is that it is very easy to have projects with people anywhere if you're working on a standard problem, because everyone loves to work on a well-defined problem where publishing is very easy. You're guaranteed that if you try anything with the standard data set, with the standard metrics, you will get published somewhere, probably top-tier conference. I don't think Sasha meant that, because she came to Córdoba a long time ago, and she's. I want to believe, I think I'm right, that she's asking more about projects that really matter to different people. So we have you have been talking about contextualizing. So it is very important to contextualize problems, but then we can fall into the trap of fragmentation, that everything is so different from all the rest that you cannot extrapolate on or use what you have learned in somewhere else. And I think that's not true. And everyone here, I think, believes that's not true. And probably you need to be able to value the problems and the insights of other people more. You need to be able to accommodate other research goals within your own path, or well, maybe say no, but probably being able to see the value in understanding the other people's questions helps in doing that. And I think I am not so much worried about international cooperation, but about working with or interdisciplinary, because scholarship understands scholarship very well. I'm currently really interested in working with people with more territory. So we are, with Luciana, we are trying to collaborate with an NGO here with a long trajectory of working with people. And we find that really rewarding. Like, it's giving us a very different perspective on things. And I think we are being able to put our, to frame problems differently from the start.
And Sasha agrees with you from her reaction to the chat and that question of understanding what are the projects that really matter to us. Our time somehow has basically reached an end. I think we are just beginning the conversation. We didn't even get, for everyone, we wanted to talk about what are the limitations of bias and fairness approaches, and we had lots of things to think about. We wanted to think about how we deal with the question of measurement and what happens when we can't measurement. We wanted to think about other questions of responsibility and what's exciting everyone. And so I hope this is just the beginning, and Khipu community, of course, will have so many, many more to come. So maybe as we end, I'd like to ask all of you, starting with you, Laura, if there's anything you are reading right now that you'd like to share with everyone, but maybe the key question, what is giving you hope in your research, in your work, in your life, in your community for Khipu right now?
So what is giving me hope is something that I already mentioned in the beginning, that I think that people are better predisposed to understand that other people might have circumstances which was not the case before. Like, you were expected to produce, and the circumstances were not really an issue, and now people are kind of more accommodating to circumstances. And I think that relates to that care issue that Emily brought also. And I think that gives me a lot of hope. I know there's a lot to do because we are all exhausted, and even if we are willing, maybe we don't have the energy to do that. But I'm hopeful about that. And I'm reading a book called In the Dark Room by Susan Faludi, which is so interesting. It's really mind-blowing. It's about the story of her father, and how everything that she lived led to decisions, and how those decisions were difficult, and how you cannot understand anything without taking everything into account. And it's really mind-blowing.
Please share with us the link, and thank you so much for sharing us that hope in caring. I think that's so important for us all to take with. Emily, what's giving you hope?
I love this final question. So I think what's giving me hope right now is all of the kind of efforts that I've been seeing in the past couple of years from within the machine learning community to really kind of affect structural change and really meaningful cultural shifts within the community. So just to give a very couple examples, we're seeing sort of shifts in incentive structures happening through small changes to conferences. So the inclusion of different kinds of tracks, the inclusion of different sorts of workshops, also seeing conferences start to grapple with what it would look like to come up with ethical oversight mechanisms. Right now, this is sort of happening on a conference per conference basis, but I think this is like part of a probably long and iterative process of the whole community thinking through what kind of frameworks of professional accountability we might all want to build into our work. And again, just seeing people, you know, in workshops and conferences, sort of thinking about how to develop frameworks and methodologies that will kind of guide the field and help us like collectively cultivate a culture of reflexivity and kind of collectively, you know, attend to gaps in knowledge. So these are the sorts of things that I'm seeing within the community that I find really encouraging. And I'm just really like thankful and grateful for all of the folks who I think are coming together to do this work.
Hope, because change is possible. Thank you so much, Emily, for coming to the Khipu community today. Luciana, lastly, what's giving you hope?
Okay, so what's giving me hope is how I see some people reacting to the new situation that we have now, to the pandemic and the post-pandemic. So I think some people are looking outside their comfort zones. They are thinking more about their own privileges, and I hope they are starting to care more about the others. I've met during this period or got closer to some great people from Denmark, from Japan, here in Argentina, in Brazil, in Chile, and from other countries. And in Latin America, we have crises regularly. So we have different kinds of crises regularly. We have, in particular, economic crisis. Personally, my family suffered during the military government here in Argentina, as well as in the economic crisis in the 90s, when the public companies were sold to, and privatized. So I know, I mean, we are, they say we are used to living through some crisis and challenging our own privileges in that while we live through this crisis. So I think that these crises worldwide are giving people other view on life, and this other view on life is what's giving me hope in this moment.
Yeah, that hope, because we see better now, and I think that's so great. Everyone, we've reached the end of our panel. Please make lots of noise in the chat. Thank our panelists, Emily Denton, Laura Alonso Alemany, Luciana Benotti. We thank you so much. Thank you for coming to Khipu community today. Thank you for sharing your knowledge. And for everyone, there's a 10-minute break now, and then afterwards you get more time with Luciana and Laura to do a more practical deep dive with some actual data. And again, thank you so much. Stay safe, and we hope we'll see you all again soon. Bye, everyone.
Abrir y cerrar, vienes juntando debajo de tu brazo hoy mis penitas de santo. Tal vez Prima de mi corteza, toda morena, que me tiñó la piel. Sí que sabes aparecerte de día o declinarme dormida, echarte a correr. Mira cantor, mira corazón, dime pedazo de canción a medias, ¿de dónde llegas? Sabes entrar, abrir y cerrar, vienes juntando debajo de tu brazo hoy mis penitas de cantor. Tal vez todo será buen recuerdo si llega al olvido primero. Pa' mí no hay cosa más dulce que tu agua salada de mi río. Sí,
no hay límite más grande para este imaginante.
Que una duda morena envuelta en flores de otra primavera.
Para recordarte feliz voy a tener que olvidarte, que no hay cosa más dulce que vos. Ay, si no llega el olvido, ¿quién cura este delirio? De una duda morena envuelta en flores de otra primavera. De una duda morena envuelta en flores de otra primavera.
Recuerdo lejano de un exilio forzado, a duras penas nomás y todo. Lo que tocan tus manos queda petrificado en tiempo y espacio. Mira cantor, mira vida, dime razón de mis días, ya no te atees. Alejanos visitantes que saben entrar, abrir y cerrar, vienen juntando debajo de tu brazo hoy mis penitas de cantor. Tal vez todo será buen recuerdo si llega el olvido primero hoy. Pa' mí no hay cosa más dulce que tu agua salada da en mi río. Sí,
Créeme, no hay límite más grande para este imaginante.
Que una duda morena envuelta en flores de otra primavera.
gravedad de la realidad. Las cosas que me sorprendían, hoy en día ninguna me deslumbra de verdad. Los fantasmas que intento atrapar se me escabullen en los brazos. Tendría que aceptar mi realidad o pedirle a los astros que tengan piedad. Aquí estoy trabajando, no pierdo la dignidad. Con este hambre voraz queriendo siempre más y más, creyendo que algún día iba a poder saciar, fantaseando que en algún momento de la vida me crecerían alas para poder volar. Y a quien no le falta el aliento en este aposento de frivolidades, hay que estar atento para no pasarse de ingenuidades. ¿Quién le dijo que él y yo éramos rivales? Más bien amantes, correteamos por los valles incesantes. Creímos ser como la encina y el roble, permanecer unidos nos haría inmortales y así viví un amor de eternidades. Y así viví nuestro amor de eternidades. No quisiera desaparecer antes de mojarme otra vez los pies en la luna. No quisiera desaparecer antes de mojarme otra vez los pies en la luna. Te creíste sabio sabiendo que lo lograrías. Sabía algo que no sabías. Vía a vía se te pasó el tranvía. Otra vez estás luchando contra la deriva. Quisiera desenmascarar al enmascarado, aquel que desucede ver el mundo conquistado. Se ha colocado una careta y no protesta. Patea a quien sea con tal de alcanzar su meta. Se me está haciendo difícil con usted interactuar. Trastabilla su lengüeta cada vez que intenta hablar. ¿Quién le dijo que él y yo éramos rivales? Más bien amantes, correteamos por los valles incesantes. Creímos ser como la encina y el roble, permanecer unidos nos haría inmortales. Y así viví un amor de eternidades. Y así viví nuestro amor de eternidades. No quisiera desaparecer antes de mojarme otra vez los pies en la luna. No quisiera desaparecer antes de mojarme otra vez los pies en la luna. No quisiera desaparecer antes de mojarme otra vez los pies en la luna. No quisiera desaparecer antes de mojarme otra vez los pies en la luna.
Yo disfruto de esta vida que me ha tocado suerte. A esta tierra le prometo gozar hasta que me ausente.
Yo disfruto de esta vida que me ha tocado en suerte. A esta tierra le prometo gozar hasta que me ausente. No me alcanza con soñar lo que hay en el aliento. Pa' soñar con otra vida cierro los ojos, intento. Para enseñarme a volar voy a pedirle a los vientos que me eleven allá alto y me dejen un intento. Yo no sufro, no se crea, mi grito no es de dolor. Voy a agarrar a las penas y voy a cambiarle el color.
Okay, well, welcome back. I hope everybody can see my screen. Please, could you confirm through the chat if you can see it? You should be able to see a notebook right now. So I will be starting with the tutorial. Oh, great. Yes. I will be starting with this tutorial. This is the notebook, the collab notebook that we are going to use now. We already have shared this through Slack with you, but we'll share it again. And we have adapted it from the Responsibly Toolkit. And we are very thankful to Shlomi Hott and colleagues from the Alexander von Humboldt Institute for Internet Society in Berlin for sharing this very useful resource for exploring bias in word embeddings. You can also explore other tutorials adapted to different audiences in their webpage that you will find the link there in the notebook. That is learn.responsibly.ai. So what we will be doing in this tutorial is, in order to work on a concrete example of bias, we will focus on gender bias with respect to occupations. I will show the available tools for visualizing and exploring the embeddings, and I will illustrate the observable bias regarding occupations. After my brief introduction, Laura will show a technique for mitigating the bias that we have observed in these English word embeddings, and she will also show how Lucia, that worked with us, has adapted this toolkit to Spanish. Lucia recently started a scholarship with Laura and me to explore bias in natural language processing from a Latin American perspective. Her scholarship is by the non-profit Fundar in Argentina. So let's get started with the notebook. And so here we have like an introduction for you to read, because this notebook is supposed to be a resource that you can take home. And there is a setup that is very easy to follow, where you can install everything that is necessary before you start. Since due to the snow, I don't have a reliable internet connection today, I will not be executing live things here, but you can follow me with the notebook that we have shared, or do it afterwards by yourself. Everything is explained on how you have to set up things for everything to work. So there is an introduction here too in part 1.1 for you to read when you use this notebook on your own. And in section, we will go directly in this tutorial to section 1.2, that is the data set and that loads the word embeddings based on this data set that was obtained from Google News. It contains 100 billion tokens and 3 million vocabulary with 300 dimension vectors. So we will use a reduced version of these word embeddings. This reduced version has, as you can see here, 26,000 words. But I wanted to mention that, as Sasha Luciani said on Twitter in one of our posts in the previous discussion to this session, it is important to notice that this reduction to the vocabulary does not lose information regarding the relation among the words, because these relations are the same that in the large vocabulary. So just the 26 more frequent words are extracted, but the relations remain the same. Okay, so after all this buzz and excitement that we've been hearing for several years already regarding word embeddings, and people claiming that they encode the meaning of words, we've observed in the Khipu community that there is different knowledge about in the community regarding word embeddings. So some people have already used them in tools, some people do research on these things, but many other people just read about word embeddings embeddings on the thing that I wanted to start is with something very simple, is when they say, okay, this representation encodes the meaning of words. So I said, okay, let's see what's the meaning of love. And then you get this whole 300 dimensional vector of real numbers between -1 and 1. And this is a bit disappointing as the meaning of word, as the meaning of love. But well, just this representation is not easily interpretable for us humans. So this is just here to illustrate that. We don't know what, in fact, something that I found disappointing the very first time that I was listening, like very excited about these word embeddings, was that we don't know how to interpret each of these 300 dimensions. It's not that one in regards is related to color and the other one is related to size or something like that, right? There is no easy interpretation. So if we go now to the next section, that is 1.3, measuring distance between words, we see here that what word embeddings give us is the ability to explore the relation between words. So the most common way to do that is to use cosine similarity. That's the metric that is mostly used. So here we have different examples that are analyzing what's the cosine similarity of the vector cat with respect to the vector cat, and we get almost 1 there. Remember that this number ranges between 1 and minus 1, as it says here. And then if we compare cat to cats, the plural, we get a quite high similarity, 0.809. And then it goes down if we compare cat to dog, although this is quite high, right? It's 0.76. So it's not that far from the plural. And if we compare it to horse, it starts to go even lower. And then with respect to finance, so the distance from cat to finance, it's already negative. So we can also query this library with the most similar words that will give us a ranking. Here I'm asking for the top 5, the words that are more similar to cat. And I get cats, dog, kitten, feline, puppy. And so these are different tools that we can use here, like the most simple ones. And then something that we posted on Twitter and also on Slack was this little exercise to find the odd one out. So here we have this function that is called doesn't match, and a list of words. We have hairdresser, nurse, man, school, housekeeper, and it returns nurse. So something that that was asked during this interaction by Pablo Grossman was what was this function exactly doing? So what this function is doing is taking the average of these word vectors, and then it returns the word that is further away from this average. And then some people were making hypotheses. So why is this returning nurse? And one of the hypotheses that was raised by Mauricio Repeto and Juan Dalmacio was to say that nurse may be the one that looks like the more professional against the other professions that are mentioned, like hairdresser or housekeeper. And Leandro Lombardi also said that the words surrounding nurse in the training data may be more domain specific. So something that I did was to add the word manager here. And so in order to try to see whether a word that was maybe considered more professional or more professional status was even further away. And yes, the result in this case is manager. Then Meire Fortunato also suggested that we make all the words related to only one gender. And here I changed man, woman by men, and we still get manager. So we see no change. And if we change all man and men to woman and women, we also see the same result. So here we are just starting to play with the word embeddings. Keep in mind, we are only doing this exploratory data analysis, and we are not doing a systematic evaluation, right? So we are just seeing some examples. But an open question that arose from this discussion was whether these word embeddings were associated with some sort of status. So it was associating professions with some sort of status. So suppose that these word embeddings are doing that, and then they are used for a system that decides who gives a bank loan, who to give a bank loan based on people's social media analysis, or who may be more susceptible to fake news or propaganda. Who do you think the system will send that fake news propaganda to? To a nurse, to a housekeeper, to a manager? So most work on machine learning bias is related to gender or race. The work that we see in the conferences, for instance. So we think that these questions that arose from our preliminary discussion on Slack and Twitter are related to some other sort of bias that we call it economic status bias. And these word embeddings may encode that, and they have not been investigated. So when on Slack, we asked people whether there was some sort of bias that was not investigated enough, economic bias was the most voted option related to their Latin American perspective. So we think these are questions that deserve more research. Okay, now if we move to point 1.4, this is just for completeness. There are these tools that are that are invoked here, and that build a cloud of words that match the 300 dimensions that we have in the word embeddings to 2 dimensions, and then they show clusters of semantically aligned words. So this is a way of visualizing what the word embeddings are showing. And in particular, in this example, we are showing the words between 200 and 600, because if you go lower in the most frequent words, you will get just the function words. If you start from 0, that function words are, for instance, prepositions or the word a or de that are the most frequent in English. If you go higher, you may explore words that are not so frequent, that are more content related. So this is a tool that is useful for and has been quite used in the area of word embeddings, as have been also the vector analogies that we have in this section 1.5. So the vector analogies here in the beginnings of word embeddings became very popular. Word embeddings, we see here an example that they learn interesting morphological relations between words. So if we ask a word embedding, small is to smaller, as good is to what, it returns better. And it even returns stronger, that is also semantically related. As we can explore morphological relations, we can explore also relations between other kinds of words. And here we have one example that is related to gender. If we ask man is to carpenter as woman is to what, here these word embeddings answer school teacher or homemaker. And these analogies have been used to illustrate gender bias in word embeddings. So this first part illustrates the tools. Now let's move to the second part of the notebook, when we need to take into account what we need to take into account to diagnose gender bias. And also, as we say in the notebook, we oversimplify here gender as a binary phenomenon, although it is not. So let's go to the second part. In part 2.1, we notice that there are some words in English that codify gender in the morphology of the words. For instance, if we say, if we ask she is to sister as he is to what, the system answers brother. So the system is associating brother to a gender, to the gender male, and it's associating sister to the gender female. And that makes sense because these are words that morphologically they encode gender. This is more frequent in Spanish. In Spanish, most of our nouns encode gender, and Laura is going to talk about that. However, in English, there are many words that do not encode gender in the morphology, that is in the form of the words. But anyway, they are associated inside the word embeddings to a gender. For instance, so in this example, we see that if we ask she is to interior designer as he is to what, here the model answers architect, carpenter, painter. What is showing this is that interior designer is more related to a female gender and architect, carpenter are more related to a male gender. So what this observation let us do is we can use this form of reasoning to identify a gender direction by subtracting the vector he from she, and then asking what is the gender direction of a word that represents a profession. So a negative number here, as we see in architect, and a negative result is showing that this word architect is more related to the male, and interior designer that gets a positive number is related to female. So in other words, what this means is that a negative number that like the one that we get for architect means that architect appears in more context with the he than with the she. So the pronoun that is used to replace architect is more frequently he than she. That's what this is showing, because this is how word embeddings are trained. And of course, we we would like for you to try out this notebook, everything around it, and in particular, there is this section 2.4 for things that you can try yourself. Not only professions are associated to genders, but some other things are also associated to gender, some other words in the language. So finally, what I want to show here is that what we do is to take a list of professions in English that we can see here that are considered that they should be neutral professions. These are taken from this library that you have here. And here I'm showing the first 8 professions in this list. For instance, we have accountant, adjunct professor, administrator. So these are words that are not morphologically marked for a gender. And what we do is we visualize down here how these words and also some other words that are morphologically marked in gender, like businesswoman that we see here, how they fall, whether they fall more on a female gender, here marked in blue with she, or on a male gender marked with he and orange. So we see here that some words that are morphologically marked, like businesswoman and actress, are more associated to a female, but also some words that are that are neutral with respect to their morphology, like nurse or paralegal, they are more associated to the female gender. And the same happens for male, for instance, for philosopher. So Laura will now show a technique for mitigating these biases that we have shown and also explore them in Spanish. Laura, are you around? Yeah, I see you.
Yes, I want to share my screen. I don't know if I can do that.
I will stop sharing mine.
Great. Okay, so I am going on with section 3. Right. With all these tools that Luciana has shared, we can have a direct measure, like one of those single numbers that we all love so much because we can table them and we can chart them and we can be very objective, so to say, with our experiments, which of course is not true because this is all based on a lot of assumptions, like the gender direction is properly represented by a binary direction, and he and she are the two extremes. But okay, as you making all that explicit, what we do is we have a list of words that we understand that should be neutral with respect to gender, which are these professions, and this should is has values, but of course everything has values, so these are the values that we want the embedding to have. So we would like this these words to be neutral. So and we have seen with this graphic that Luciana just showed that they are not, because if they were neutral, they should be here. So what we do is simply measure this and bring them here. Yeah. What we do is we project each neutral profession, each word in this list of neutral words on the gender direction, calculate the absolute value, and this is an average it. This is to measure how much bias our embedding has. Yes, so we have this bias for this direction, considering this neutral list of words. It's an indicator. Yes, this is the explanation of what this high-level function does. Yeah. So like this, you can compare, for example, different embeddings. Yeah, you can say, okay, I have this embedding that I have learned with the Wikipedia. I have this embedding that I have learned with, I don't know, 4chan. I have this embedding that I have learned from Moodle MOOCs. Yeah, so I don't know. And you compare them, and this gives you an idea of how these words behave, if they occur more frequently with he or she, or if they have a more equitative behavior. Yeah, but once you have that, you can also put every word in the center. Yes, obtaining something like, I will jump here because I know it's running late. you can remove the bias from these words that you know, that are neutral, okay, and leave them like this. Why are we not removing bias from these words? Actress, housewife, waitress, socialite, maid, nun, because they should not. We think that they should not be neutral because they are marked, morphologically marked. Markedness is a linguistic concept. It means that the form of the word is explicitly conveying some semantics. So they are marked for gender. So they should not be neutral. But all these others, like swimmer, analyst, geologist, pathologist, inventor, should be. And what we are doing is moving them across the direction of gender that we have found by saying one extreme is he, the other extreme is she. So we are going to move these words until they are in the very center. And you will say, oh, but this breaks the whole embedding. The embedding will be a mess if you do that. Well, it does not. It does not break the embedding. The embedding still works very nicely when you do this, and there are in the reference papers that are here in the notebook that you can find in the link that we have shared, I think somewhere, at least in Twitter, and we can share now in the chat. So it is shown that you are not breaking the embedding. Why? Because you're only moving words in one dimension, so to say. There are many other aspects of the words that are not altered. Yes, and the embeddings are still working quite nicely. Okay, so here we have some numerical representation of what happens when we do this. Here, I was just saying how many neutral words are there in this framework that we are using responsibly. There are 26,000 words that are considered, that should be neutral in English. English is a language where, an analytic language, where words are by default not marked by with gender. So you can easily have a lot of words that should be neutral, that you consider that should be neutral with respect to gender, like these ones here, verbs, or I don't know. Here you have many verbs, but also, I don't know, onset, all kinds of words, then you use this, you neutralize this word, with the high function debias, and you obtain another embedding where these words have been brought to the center of the gender direction that we defined before. And if we compare the bias of the original version of the embedding with the debiased version of the embedding, we can see that there is a very big difference, because note here the E minus 0.9, so this is a very small number. So this debiased version of the embeddings has less bias with respect to the direction of gender that and the list of words that we have stipulated. These are stipulations, and I think we all think we should not be using the word debiased, but because the embeddings are not fully debiased, it's just that bias is somehow mitigated according to our values that we are injecting here through the stipulation of the direction and the neutral words. Okay, and we can see how, for example, home was a little bit biased before the neutralization, and it is much less biased after the neutralization. Same happens with architect, interior designer. You can play with that later if you want. Okay, and now we are going to work with this for Spanish, because this is all very well for English. Many people have been making a lot of experiments, and there is a lot of controversy that you can find in the original notebook wherefrom we adapted this from Shlomi Hotz, citing a lot of references. And at the bottom, you can find also references discussing different aspects of these mitigations and whether we are actually representing gender or not. But this is like a nice tool to explore and to have an assessment, a rough assessment, somewhere to begin with. But it's for English. What happens with Spanish? And we are thankful to our students in last year. Last year, Luciana and me, we were teaching a practical ethics in data science workshop, and 3 of our students, Manuela Lois, Julieta Pacharoni, and Diego Gonzalez, came up with this very nice implementation to Spanish that then Lucia Gonzalez took and worked out a little bit more. They are coming from very different backgrounds, and especially Lucia's background as a political activist helped a lot in trying to find words that would be helpful here. So we have a lot of differences between Spanish and English, but one of the biggest ones is that Spanish has gender marked in the morphology of the words. That means that the grammatical gender, that all words, not all words, but mostly nouns and adjectives have grammatical gender. So they are either feminine or masculine, which means that we cannot rely, it is not so easy to find a list of words that should be neutral, because many of them are not, yeah? So the approach cannot be applied straightforwardly, yeah? And to understand this, you need to understand a little bit of the domain where you are applying this. So if a technique that works well in English is adapted to Spanish, you're probably failing because you're not taking into account things like that. The other characteristic of Spanish is that in Spanish you can have a sentence without explicit mention of the subject. This is a pro-drop language, and this means that he and she are not so representative. Yeah, and we will see how. So we will need to be using other words besides he and she to create the gender direction. So to work with this, to implement this approach for Spanish, we worked with the word embeddings for Spanish obtained with fast text by Jorge Pérez from Chile, from the Spanish William Words corpus obtained compiled by Cristian Carrellino from Córdoba, and we thought that fast text was the best kind of embedding for this instead of word2vec, which was the one used for the example in English, because it is fast text uses a method that captures some of the variabilities in letters, not only in full words. So given that in Spanish you have many variabilities in the form of words, this was a better option. So we load things here. We can make the same kinds of expressions that Luciana has shown for English, and you will see very surprising things, as you can imagine. No, sorry, I don't know where I am now. Sorry, I jumped. Yeah, so you will see very expected things like feminine doctor minus woman gives some kind of doctors, and feminine doctor without, so masculine doctor without minus woman gives some things, feminine doctor minus men gives some other things. And you will see many gender stereotypes reflected here, and you can play with intelligent, for example, and many other things. You can look and play here, and you will not be surprised. Then we can calculate the gender direction using, for example, he and she as extremes of this direction to define this direction. And we see that the words, for example, architect feminine and architect masculine are in different directions, but these differences do not look that different. Yeah, if we use more words than he and she to build this gender direction, we see that these two words are more differentiated. Believe me, here we have I know. Maybe I didn't compile this, but believe me, this was different some time ago. Yeah, maybe we can. No, here. So this is the original, and this is no. Yeah, we will see later. Okay, and we can see also that some words that are gendered nouns are, even though they are gendered, their grammatical gender does not imply that a semantic gender. For example, the word engineering, the abstract concept engineering, which is a feminine, grammatically feminine word in Spanish, is placed more in the masculine, so to say, end of the or side of the gender direction. Okay, so this can all be improved, of course. Yeah, like the way we define the gender direction. But the real problem here is the neutral words to find to measure the bias in the embedding and to neutralize, because the mitigation that we are putting in this embedding by neutralization only affects the words in the neutral list, in the neutral words list. So what we need is a very big list of neutral words, which is difficult, or at least more difficult to learn in Spanish than in English, because to acquire, because many words are marked with gender. So first we made an attempt with a list of neutral professions, and we saw that effectively neutral professions are professions that should be neutral are not so neutral, but are have this skew in the gender direction that we defined before. For example, singer, florist are very feminine, while soldier, assistant, psychiatrist are more masculine. And with this list, some very small list of words, we can do some mitigation, but we only have 23 words, so this will only be useful for 23 words. For these 23 words, it will work perfectly. They will have no bias, but for all the rest that you have here, not this one, for example, engineer, we will not have a mitigation. Why? Because engineer here is masculine. You have the masculine ingeniero and the feminine ingeniera. So it does. There are many words that cannot be addressed by this method. But we have some words that can be included quite straightforwardly. like words that belong to grammatical categories that have no gender, like verbs, adverbs, and prepositions. That is a lot. You can also have abstract words that normally have a grammatical gender, but the grammatical gender is not associated to a semantic gender. Obtaining abstract words is not so difficult. For example, you can use EuroWordNet top concepts to retrieve abstract words. Or this was a very nice idea of Lucia's, words that talk about collectives that are used in inclusive language in many places. Like, for example, students. You cannot, in Spanish, you cannot say students without saying masculine or feminine students. So what is recommended for inclusive language is to say the studentship, yeah? So, or the student collective, yeah? So these are very nice words to have as neutral and that we want neutralized, yeah? And some suffixes like able, and this kind of words. And we see that effectively these words that we know should be neutral are not. Like, these are verbs, for example, and we see very feminine verbs like dance, and masculine words like think, argument, ask, reason, and all that. Yeah, so these words would benefit from this strategy of mitigation, at least these ones, yeah. Collectives that should also be neutral according to our values are not, like, for example, cuisine is feminine and presidency is masculine. The same happens with abstract concepts like beauty or power. And adjectives also, you will be very surprised here as well. Sweet, capable, kind, yeah, audacious, yeah. And the question remains, can we incorporate words with marked gender, like grammatical gender, that we do not think should be very skewed? Well, this is also different now. Okay. Well, we have this feeling that the same word, there are many words that can be organized in pairs, yeah, like cat, feminine, cat, masculine, or architect, feminine, architect, masculine, and that these pairs should be equally distant from this center of the gender direction. So we are not doing this, but this could be done here. So the notebook does not include this, but this is something nice, that some nice enhancement that maybe one of you would like to do and share with us. You can see here that professions that are feminine gendered are much more gendered than masculine gendered professions, which is the default, of course. Masculine is very professional. And this has also found has been also found elsewhere, with a much more sophisticated strategy for mitigating gender bias in gendered language, in gender languages. So I don't want to take any more of your time. This is resources here, plenty of them to read and see about other techniques to do and to approach these problems. And I don't know. I don't know if we have much time for questions or comments, but the notebook is available for you to play.
Well, thank you very much, Laura and Luciana. This was absolutely amazing, and the first part as well. I hope everyone enjoyed it as much as I did. So thank you so much for participating again.
Thank you, Pablo.
Thank you.
No,
Everybody
thank you.
for organizing.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for giving us this opportunity. It's really valuable for us.
Awesome. All right. So now I'm gonna make a tiny presentation on what is to come. Let me do this. So this is. All right. So thanks everyone again for participating. Our next session, we are really proud to announce, will be on July the 27th at the same time as all the sessions, and we'll be having Geoffrey Hinton, the Turing Award winner that you might know, and also Oriol Viñals. They will be chatting about topics on AI. Absolutely unbelievable setting for all of us. And after that, we're going to have our first virtual event that is going to be held using gather.town, which is an online interactive platform where you can essentially walk through a virtual environment and chat via video call with all the other participants. And we are all really looking forward to sort of interact a little bit more directly and chat after this awesome session that we will have on July the 27th. So, and again, please follow us on Twitter. Join our Slack channel. There's been a lot of material shared for this session of today there. For those of you who are there, probably already participated and enjoyed it, but there are many materials that are interesting to read. Also, all sorts of different postings related to the AI scene in Latin America. So thank you very much again for participating, and we'll see you on July the 27th. Bye.